welcome to Tabletop Tommies episode 15. I'm Johnny.
And I'm Phil.
And today we are going to be reviewing the brand new campaign book from Warlord Games, Italy Tough Gut. We'll be looking through sort of the background of the campaign, what the book contains generally, and the new units that are in there, and some of the new theatre selectors, and just sort of highlighting things that we thought are interesting, or things you should be aware of when you're playing bolt action. Basically, so you can decide, is this a book that should be on your list of things to buy this year? So this will be quite a long episode, so I'll put timestamps in the description so you can jump ahead to sections you want to re-listen to. Jumping into the episode, Phil, would you like to give us a little bit of background of what this campaign book is about?
Absolutely, Johnny. So this is the second campaign book, and it's covering the invasion of Italy, taking events from January 1944 onwards. So it's following on from the Soft Underbelly campaign book, and that was dealing with the invasion of Sicily from July 1943. So the Allies invaded Sicily in July 1943, and very quickly the fascist regime in Italy collapsed. The Allies pushed through Sicily, and the Germans then retreated onto the Italian mainland. Now, part of the agreement when the fascist regime signed the armistice with the Allies was that they wanted the Allies to push as quickly as possible on towards Rome. And how this was managed in terms of the Allied plan, you had the British 8th Army towards the east and then the US 5th Army towards the west. And they then were moving up from the bottom, or the boot, if you like, of Italy, pushing up towards Rome. Now, it was hoped that the Allies would push through fairly rapidly towards Rome. However, for a number of reasons, due to, for example, the German resistance and the strength of resistance, due to the weather and also due to the terrain, towards the end of 1943, the Allies were not pushing forwards onto Rome or pushing north onto Rome as quickly as hoped for. When the fascist regime collapsed, the Germans very quickly disarmed the Italians and they took over the beach defences and coastal defences. So they were well prepared for an Allied invasion. So where Tough Gut picks up is from January 1944. And at this point, you've effectively got the British and US-led armies on the Gustav Line, which is around Monte Cassino. And you also had the Anzio landing, which was slightly to the north of the Gustav Line, south of Rome. And it is from this point that the campaign book takes over.
So the first 32 pages of the book cover the history. I have to say, I found it very interesting. There's lots of good maps in there. Mm-hmm. And I particularly enjoyed the Anzio landings bit because I thought it was quite interesting. Was it Lucas, the Allied general in charge of the Anzio landings, mm-hmm. and sort of his caution, allowing the Germans to reinforce and sort of basically leading to a stalemate on the beachhead. Mm-hmm. And also Kesselring coming up, who's quite famous, and also sort of his plan that he put into action to respond to the landings because they were expecting them. Mm-hmm. I thought was quite interesting in terms of looking forward to D-Day, sort of the difference between how this landing was countered compared to how the Germans countered D-Day. So actually, I thought the history in the book was very interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on at this time because they're obviously also thinking about the invasion of France in 1944, and there's competing priorities in terms of pushing through Italy into the soft underbelly of Europe, equally moving equipment, munitions, and logistics supplies, getting that ready for the invasion of Normandy. There was also pressure from Charles de Gaulle and the French because they were keen to get back into the fight and keen, where possible, to create the French First Army, which eventually appeared later on in 1944. So a lot going on in terms of the Allied planners.
I also found it really interesting where they were talking about the landing craft and how Anzio nearly didn't happen because all the landing craft were basically being requisitioned for D-Day mm-hmm. and for the seaborne invasion of southern France, which actually is overshadowed by D-Day, but is interesting in its own right. And then it was only, I believe, Churchill had to step in.
That's right.
In order for the landing craft to be put to one side for Anzio. So actually, it's doubly interesting, that one, because it nearly didn't happen at all.
And just to throw another thing into the mix, obviously over in the Pacific, you've got the American advance through the Pacific island hopping campaign. Now, it wasn't as though equipment was being diverted from the Mediterranean and North Africa to the Pacific, but that equipment that was being manufactured in America, a big chunk of that was also having to be transferred to the Pacific as part of that island hopping campaign. So lots going on.
Yeah, it's quite busy in the world at this time, isn't it?
Anyone would have thought there was a major war going on across various different continents.
There's a war on, Yeah, Operation Dragoon was the name of the landing operation in southern France.
That's right.
I said was overshadowed by D-Day, and clearly it was because I couldn't remember its name. So, as I say, the first 32 pages of the book cover that, and then we move straight into the scenarios, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's laid out as you'd expect from more recent bolt action campaign books. So you've got the initial history, you then go into scenarios, you then get the new units, theatre selectors, and then the appendix with the bits and pieces that you need. And again, it's excellent quality in terms of the Osprey's publishing. So the scenarios themselves, there are 10 scenarios, and they are essentially either focused on the Anzio landing and breakout from Anzio, or they're focused on the Gustav line and in and around Monte Cassino. What I like about the scenarios, and it's a feature of this part of the war, and also therefore a feature of the book, is a lot of the scenarios have multinational forces.
Yeah.
So unlike in D-Day, for example, where you had the American area of operations and you had the British area of operations, in southern Italy at this time, you had a lot of mixing between US and British forces, or US, British, or Commonwealth forces, also including some French forces under the US supported units. And the scenarios reflect that. So a lot of the scenarios allow you to take a certain number of points from a US particular theatre selector, and then you might have another British theatre selector in addition, or you might have some of the different Commonwealth theatre selectors and units represented.
Yeah, it's really good for that. And some of the things that I quite liked was a lot of the scenarios have the special rules where it's the kind of stuff that you wouldn't get time to do at a tournament, but when you're doing a campaign, sort of the specific special rules like smoke screens and sort of air superiority and things can really add a lot to the cinematic feel of the game and sort of the theme of the specific scenario you're playing.
Yeah, you've got something like, say, Scenario 6, which is in and around Casino. You've got rules for trench foot, and you've got rules for sewer movement. Horrendous ground that the New Zealanders were fighting over. So, yeah, very, very thematic and flavoursome in terms of the special rules in the scenarios.
Yeah, and a lot of them have come up before. So for veteran players who've played a lot of the campaign books before and are planning a new campaign, maybe it's just expanding their soft underbelly campaign into a tough gut campaign.
Yeah,
it's not going to be hugely overwhelming. I think the majority of the rules probably have come up in other campaign books before. So the scenarios continue for about 35 pages, and then we get into the first batch of new units, which are for the British and Commonwealth. I'd say the British is probably more your domain than mine, Phil, as you probably played far more British than I have. So do you want to lead us through this section? Just let us know what's going on here.
Absolutely. So I'm going to jump to the vehicles. So there's one new vehicle which is added in Tough Gut, and that is the Staghound Mark II close support option, which gives you the turret-mounted light howitzer version of the Staghound.
So he's 10 points cheaper than a regular Staghound, and you're swapping the light anti-tank gun for a light howitzer and losing a machine gun. So it's an interesting trade. Does the regular Staghound have recce?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. So it is just a trade, basically, swapping a light anti-tank gun and an MMG for a light howitzer. That is quite a tasty one if you've got anti-tank wrapped up elsewhere in your army.
Absolutely.
That might be really good.
Yeah, and it is most of the units in Tough Gut, to be fair, count in the generic platoon. So you can take the Staghound Mark II CS version in a generic platoon. You can also add it to the Monte Cassino selector in the Armies of Great Britain book.
Looking through, I can't remember seeing many, if any, that aren't generic. And so I think rather than highlighting everyone that's generic, maybe what we'll do is we'll just, if we spot that one isn't, we'll say. That's probably going to be quicker and easier, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So what else do the British get?
So the main thing that you get in the Tough Gut is a number of different Commonwealth units, and you also get a lot more clarity as to how to represent a Commonwealth platoon through using the generic reinforced platoon option. So in terms of the new units itself, first one is the headquarters, and you get a New Zealand/Maori officer. So what you're getting here then is for 60 points regular or 75 points veteran for a second lieutenant, you're getting one officer and up to 2 accompanying soldiers, armed as normal, so exactly the same in terms of the number of men you can take and how they're armed. What's worth pointing out then is that you can either take it as a Maori officer, in which case it gets the Formidable Fighter special rule, or you can take it as as a New Zealand officer, in which case you get Steadfast Under Fire. And in addition, both New Zealand and Maori, first and second lieutenants, they have the Superb Junior Officer rule, which gives the morale bonus range of 12 inches, although the U-Men snap to action range remains 6 inches.
Yeah, and so the Formidable Fighter, does that give you tough as boots and blood curdling charge? Is that right?
Formidable Fighter for Maori troops They do not benefit from New Zealand national characteristics. Instead, they have the blood-curdling charge and tough as boots special rules.
Fabulous.
And the New Zealand characteristic of steadfast under fire. After rolling for the number of pins caused by HE fire, halve the number of pins rounding down.
That is fantastic, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because let's say I shoot you with my heavy mortar or something, or medium mortar even, that does D3 pins. A third of the time, you're going to take no pins at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of the time, you're only going to take one pin. So that's actually a really good rule. And all the New Zealand squads get the steadfast under fire, don't they?
They do, yes. Yeah. So we'll talk about it in a bit in terms of how it interacts with the platoons. But yeah, if you're a New Zealand unit, you're getting steadfast under fire. If you're a Maori unit, you're getting formidable fighter. It's going to say if they don't have that keyword, the formidable fighter keyword, you can pay for it at 1 point per man to make it into a Maori unit with that special trait.
Yeah, I think of the two, for the officer choice, I would be going for the New Zealand officer because I think steadfast for the smaller unit, because you're rarely going to get 3 or more attacks in combat because you're starting with 3 men max. Steadfast is going to be better than formidable for this particular one. Would you agree?
Yes. Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah. But the good thing as well, just to come back to it, is the superb junior officers rule, because that morale bonus for first and second lieutenants is extended to 12 inches.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to use your HQ, rather than paying the points as a tax or seeing the HQ as a tax, if you're going to use that to boost the morale, particularly, let's say, if you're using your officer towards the back line and you're adding that morale bubble or extending that morale bubble to your mortars, your artillery, or if you're putting it behind a screen of troops advancing up, you're extending it out by a further 6 inches. Going to potentially benefit you a lot when the pins start to come in.
Yeah, I'd say this one, for me, I'm not seeing this one as sort of like a must take. I can see a use for this officer where if I'm running, say, single platoon where I want to use my officer for taking objectives and actually doing work, and I'm going to take a regular officer anyway, the 10 points extra, I think he might justify that. But generally, if I'm doing something where it's maybe it's dual platoon and I'm trying to get other things in, where I would normally take an inexperienced officer, I don't think that additional 6-inch range and the ignoring HE pins makes it worth jumping from an inexperienced to a regular here for me.
Yeah.
I don't think it's tempted me, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think this is something that we'll discuss as we go through. I would say that there aren't a lot of units that you're going to look at these and go, I absolutely want to put this in my finely tuned competitive list where I am maximizing the points. However, if there are certain situations where I absolutely think you will see some of these units at events, depending on the nature of the event, the dice count, the number of points in the event, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think the fact that I'm not thinking it's an auto include, but at the same time, I'm not thinking I would never take this.
Yeah.
And I found this going through the book for a lot of the units. I think that shows that actually most of these units are nicely balanced in terms of you're not going to rock up to a game and sort of either get walked over or just roll over an opponent because you're undercosted, basically. I think most of the units are about right generally.
So if we move on to the other units that appear, first one is your infantry New Zealand section. Standard 10 points per man for regular, 13 points of veteran. You can take a number of SMGs, you can take a number of LMGs, you can add anti-tank grenades, and obviously because they're New Zealand, they get the steadfast under fire special rule. You also get the Maori infantry section, late war, which very similar to the New Zealand, so 10 points for regular, 13 points for vets. You can have up to 5 SMGs, you can have up to 2 LMGs, take anti-tank grenades, and because it's a Maori section, gets the formidable fighter rule.
One of the things I want to highlight between those two is they've nicely kitted the options to suit the roles.
Yes.
So your last squad, that's steadfast, it's going to be plinking, skirmishing, it's mainly rifles. The Maoris have more options for SMGs because they're designed for close quarters, and I like that they've done that rather than just giving everyone all the options.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely, yeah. And then next two are linked geographically. So there's an Indian infantry section, similar, 10 points regular, 13 points vet. You can take up to 3 SMGs, you can take up to 2 LMGs, you can take anti-tank grenades. Interesting things you get with the Indian, you can make them or give them the Mountain Warriors special rule for 1 point per man. And the Indian infantry section gets blood-curdling charge. So the Maoris got formidable fighters and the New Zealanders got steadfast under fire. Indians get blood-curdling charge. So the Mountain Warriors special rule, and this appears for a lot of the units throughout the rest of the book, That allows you to scale mountainous or hilly impassable terrain. So in order to do this, you have to start the turn adjacent to the impassable terrain piece. You then give them a run order, and the squad is placed on top of the mountain or the hill. If the terrain piece is higher than 6 inches, it takes the section 2 turns to scale it. At the end of the first turn of movement up the terrain piece, you leave the unit's order dice next to them showing the run order, and at the start of the next turn, before order dice are pulled, you then place the unit at the top, leaving the run order die next to them. The big thing, though, for Mountain Warriors that is worth thinking about in terms of taking it is they can make a run move through rough ground, but the run move is reduced to a maximum distance of 9 inches.
Or the other way to look at that is they can move 3 additional inches through rough ground compared to a normal infantry section that has to advance through, which is a great way to catch people off guard if they're only expecting you to be able to charge 6 inches out of rough ground.
Absolutely, yeah.
One thing that I noted with the Indian infantry section is they don't have that many SMGs for a close quarters squad.
No.
The Mountain Warriors and the Blood Curdling Charge makes them good at close quarters, but because they're not tough fighters or have any other benefits, they're not brilliant in close quarters, I would say.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the one which I think we'll probably spend a little bit of time going through, because it's quite a significant change from the Armies of version, isn't it? The Gurkhas.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is the Gurkha infantry section, MTO, so Mediterranean Theatre of Operations, 1944 to 1945. So it's 15 points per man, starts as a basic 5-man unit. You can add up to 3 SMGs. You can add up to 2 LMGs. You can add anti-tank grenades. And you can also give the unit Mountain Warriors for 1 point per man. Now, the bit where it's different to the Armies of. So the Gurkhas still get tough fighters. They get Blood Curdling Charge, so they can take Mountain Warriors and Tank Hunter. And they get what is now called an Intimidating Foe. And this is instead of Scary Blighters. So Intimidating Foe means that units fighting in close combat with the Gurkhas treat draws as defeats. So the mechanic that halved the number of attacks that your enemy was making against your Gurkha unit has gone for this particular unit. Instead, you're treating draws as defeats for your opponent.
Which is different, but still quite powerful.
Yes.
It's more situational than their original universal rule.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is it does feel like this Gurkha section is costed appropriately because you're paying a point for tough fighters and a point for intimidating foe. One thing that is interesting, though, is normally when you have tough fighter already with the Brits, they give you a discount on your SMGs, and they haven't here.
Yes, that's right.
So actually, this is the first time the Gurkhas are overpaying for something compared to another unit.
Also, Johnny, they are 15 points per model rather than 14, which is the normal cost for a Gurkha in the Armies of Great Britain book.
I do think with these, we're not going to see them very often outside of theatre play because they are appropriately costed. So if it's a competitive game, you're going to take the low-cost Gurkhas version, aren't you?
Yes.
There's no benefit to taking this one, I would say, over the usual either Armies of Gurkha version or the Para Gurkhas. But I think it is nice to be able to play Gurkhas in a way where people won't hate you.
Yeah, not completely. Yeah, slightly, but not fully. Yeah.
I think it might be worth noting here that they're getting Blood Curdling Charge, but that's not in addition to national rules. I know we were going to go through that later.
Yeah.
But that's a replacement for... Sorry, that's the national characteristic they have to take, isn't it?
Yeah, so for all of the new Commonwealth units, so the New Zealand ones we've spoken about, Maori, Indian, Gurkha, and the ones we're going to talk about, where they've got something like Blood Curdling Charge or Formidable Fighters or Steadfast Under Fire, if they were to appear in a generic British platoon, they wouldn't get the national characteristic that you've chosen for that platoon. These units can only have the one listed under their unit entry applies to them.
Brilliant. Yeah, I know we were going to talk about that when we talked about sort of building armies in general, but I thought it was particularly worth noting for anyone looking at the Gurkhas in case they do think they are undercosted because they've got that additionally.
Yes.
Anything else you want to say about the Gurkhas, or can we move on to some Canadians?
No, we'll move on to Canadians. So next then is the Canadian Infantry Section, MTO 44-45. These are inexperienced regular or vets at 7, 10 or 13. 5-man squads is your base level. You can, inexperienced and regular sections may replace the NCOs and one other man's rifle with an SMG. So 2 SMGs for inexperienced and regular. You can take 3 SMGs if they're veteran.
Which is interesting. I've never seen...
No.
I might have seen, but I don't recall ever seeing different loadouts for different veterancies within one entry.
Mm-hmm.
So that's mildly interesting, I suppose.
Yep. You can then, if you're inexperienced or regular, you can add 1 LMG. If you're veteran, you can add 2 LMGs. You can give them anti-tank grenades. You can make the section stubborn for 1 point per man. Now, I don't think I've seen before inexperienced stubborn squads.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you know, it rings a bell that I think there might be one other example, but I certainly couldn't name it. So I'm going to say that I don't, I haven't seen it either. And then they can also have, they can be section avant deux, can't they?
Yeah. So Canadian infantry section for plus 1 point per man. You can give them the Esprit de Corps special rule.
Mm-hmm.
The Esprit de Corps special rule says then that you can remove D2 pins whenever they pass an order test instead of the usual 1 pin. Now, if you choose to do that with your Van Du Canadian section, you can't then make them stubborn.
Yeah, so you can't pay the 2 points. I have to say, between those two special rules, I'm going to go with stubborn every time for the same price. I think if stubborn wasn't an option, I don't think it's a bad rule per se, but I think stubborn is definitely better in bolt action.
And then in terms of their special rules, they get tough as old boots. So that's their national characteristic. That's the Canadian unit. Stubborn, tank hunter, and Esprit de Corps if you're going to pay the extra points.
And then we've got some Poles turning up in the British Army. What's going on there, Phil?
Yep. So the last two then new units are Polish. So a little bit of sort of history here. The Poles were fighting as part of the British Army. So these two units don't become available in a Polish generic platoon. They are available in a British generic reinforced platoon because essentially they are a unit within the British Army as opposed to a Polish unit within the Polish Army.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, it is a historical game after all, so keep them in the right place.
Yeah. So your Polish infantry section, it's 11 points for regular or 14 points for vets. Base unit of 5 men. You can add up to 3 SMGs. Regular sections can have 1 LMG. Vets can have 2. And you can give them anti-tank grenades. Now, their special rules, they have up and atom as their national characteristic. And they also get wild geese. And the wild geese special rule says then that when taking order tests, Polish infantry sections ignore 1 pin. If the unit only has 1 pin, they must still take the order test.
Yeah, which is interesting because other units that have the ignore 1 pin rule, including in this book, don't have that last clause where it says they still have to take a test. And so that's quite interesting. I don't know. It implies that the other ones don't have to take the test. Either that or there is inconsistency. But one presumes, benefit of the doubt, that the other ones don't take a test.
Yeah. And then the final unit is the Polish Commando subsection 1944. Now, these are expensive. These are 17 points for a veteran. 5 men is your base unit. Any man can have an SMG. Any man in the subsection may be equipped with a pistol in addition to other weapons for plus 1 point per man.
So I don't know why you would give them pistols because
they've got
they're already tough fighters. I suppose you could argue so you can shoot a point blank without the movement penalty, but 90% of the time you're going to have the long range penalty for that anyway, so it's a bit of a pointless upgrade, but it's nice to have, I suppose.
Yeah, that is a weird one. Any man equipped with an SMG may be equipped with a suppressed Sten gun at 2 points per weapon, so you're paying 2 points for the SMG and then 2 points again to suppress it.
Notice 2 points in SMG because they've already got tough fighter.
Unlike the Gurkha entry we just mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, so straight away we've got an example of one where you get that discount.
Yeah. You can have 1 man with an LMG, you can give them anti-tank grenades, and you can give them demo charges for 3 points per man. Now, they have a ton of special rules, which is why they're costing you 17 points. So they get tough fighters, that's because they're commandos. They get Acna carry training, which is, we've seen this before, this appeared in the Soft Underbelly book. It's specific to the commandos, and it's to do with moving through and over impassable terrain.
It's effectively the same as Mountain Warrior, isn't it?
It is, yes.
The wording is slightly different in that it's not just mountainous and hilly impassable terrain, but in essence, it's the same thing where you can climb over impassable terrain and you can run 9 inches through rough ground.
Behind enemy lines, which is you ignore the -1 when you're outflanking. Masters of Concealment, which is to do with when they're spotted if they're hidden. They get up and atom, that's their national characteristic. And then we mentioned demo charges, tank hunter, and suppressed weapons.
Yeah, the Masters of Concealment and the suppressed weapons, I think they're things that you're mainly going to see in campaign scenarios and sort of like homebrew scenarios because most of the time hidden isn't in effect or particularly useful, especially because this squad isn't forward deploying to use those submachine guns when they're already hidden. They have to move and become unhidden before they'll be in range most of the time. And so, interesting, there are a lot of points, aren't there?
They are, yeah.
19 points a model with SMGs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I wanted to do a unit like that, I'd probably take an Indian squad. And although they're not all tough fighters, you get a similar sort of thing where you can put pressure on through rough ground.
Mm-hmm.
Or there are other options in the Brits. I mean, the Brits have options for days, don't they?
Yeah. So that's the new British unit. So you don't get a huge amount. What you do get are some specific units relating to the different nations that were fighting under the British and Commonwealth umbrella. And then what I did mention a minute ago was that it gives you a bit more clarity with regards to when you're creating a Commonwealth platoon. And this appears later on in the book when it starts getting into the theatre selectors. So if you're reading along at home, it's on page 118. And we'll just talk through this. So it says on 118, as a rule, all British Commonwealth and British supported armies chosen from this book do not benefit from the normal national characteristics. And this is the next bit that's crucial. Nor do any individual units chosen from this book as part of other armies. This is because each unit has individual special rules as outlined below. If units from other books were added to a force using selectors from this book, they still need to select a national characteristic as normal. So it's that last bit I highlighted there. Nor do any individual units chosen from this book as part of other armies. So if you were building a generic reinforced platoon, a British generic reinforced platoon, and you wanted to use units from this book, which you can take in a generic platoon, you still choose your national characteristic for your platoon. However, if you've taken New Zealand or Maori or Indian or the Gurkhas from this, or the Poles, they don't get that national characteristic in addition to the one that's listed under their unit entry.
Nice. Yeah, it's nice that they've added that clarity. And they've actually printed it twice. It's on 73 in the top corner and a top secret box as well.
Yeah.
Can I highlight the heroes of the British Empire quickly before we move on to the next section?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the first one is Sepoy Kamal Ram, VC, who can join a veteran infantry section for the above cost of 30 points. Now, he just has a rifle, but he is a tough fighter.
Yeah.
If the squad takes Mountain Warrior, he has to pay the point to take Mountain Warrior as well. Now, the reason I want to highlight this fella is when he engages in close quarters, at the end of the close quarters, if he can get into base contact with another squad, and not his unit, him individually, he can do a second round of close quarters on the same activation, which I don't remember ever happening in bolt action before. The sort of the rolling close quarters.
There's a Gurkha character in, I think it's in Empire in Flames, that does something very similar. Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's one to keep an eye on if you are allowing special characters.
It's effectively like an overrun, isn't it, in other game systems?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Destroy one unit and then you carry on your charge. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was only 19 when he received his Victoria Cross. And so, and I think it was on his first action as well. Yeah, on his first day in combat on the 12th of May 1944. So because of that, he has the Youthful Exuberance special rule, which basically means he gets 2 attacks in close quarters. 2 attacks. And then we have the character, the model, which is the reason why, even though we got a review copy of this book, I still purchased it because I wanted Corporal
Wojtek, I think.
Wojtek, basically the soldier bear.
It's the bear.
I've got the model in front of me. I would recommend the model. I haven't painted him yet. I can't give any review on what he'll look like painted, but looking at the model, it does look like a good model. So basically, the bear, it allows you to re-roll to hit on one high explosive, so either a light mortar, either a mortar or a 25-pounder within 6 inches of him. That is only for one of them, so you can't just create a mortar pit where everyone's re-rolling. He's a celebrity bear, so units within 12 inches get a +3 morale boost as though they were in range of, is that a captain's bonus?
Yeah.
And he's also very friendly, this bear, so he never initiates an assault, but he will fight when assaulted, and if you do assault him, he's getting 2 attacks in close quarters, tough fighter.
And he gets 2 wounds as well, yeah.
He gets 2 wounds as well, and additionally, if you want to charge him, much like charging a tank, you have to take a bear fear test, which is basically a normal order test at -2 modifier. And if you fail, much like a tank fear test, you just stay where you are with a run order next to you.
And you can take him instead of a captain or a major in a generic platoon, which is brilliant.
I didn't even notice that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I was really excited for this guy.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say he's very expensive, 138 points, and that has put
Yeah.
me off running him day to day.
Yeah.
And I think he's underpowered because he's a bear.
Yeah.
I think he could shoot a bear more than twice as many times as a man before you put him down. And so I think he should probably have 4 wounds, if I'm honest, and then he would be very good.
Mm-hmm.
But still, worth highlighting because it's brilliant, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's a good model. Yeah.
So I'll probably get him out at some point, but not at the WTC or something like that.
No.
Brilliant. And then we move into new US and French units. So what's going on here, Phil? Why have US and French been clumped together?
So the French fought underneath the US Army jurisdiction, and they were referred elsewhere in the book as US supported units. So what you got is a number of French units appearing in Tough Gut. They don't become available in a French generic platoon. They do become available in a US generic platoon because they are very much French, but specifically they are colonial North African units, which were fighting under the organization and with the support of the US Army. At this point, the Free French Army hadn't been formed at this stage of the war.
Oh, really? That's very interesting. So at this point, what are the Free French are basically currently fighting under US command, effectively.
After very, very briefly in the nutshell. So when France initially surrendered and capitulated, the French that escaped and fought in North Africa, they were initially supported by the British. So the Free French Force that appears in the Western Desert campaign book is very much a British supplied French unit or French army. Later on, sort of 1942, 1943, they then fell under US jurisdiction. So what you see in southern Italy is French units fighting with US arms and equipment. And then it's only later on in 1944 that France appears again as an independent army, as opposed to it being supported by the British or supported by the US. That said, the late war French are entirely pretty much supplied by the US.
Yeah. So all these units are FEC, which is the French Expeditionary Corps. So wherever we see that, that's going to be under US command, basically. So that'll be in a US platoon.
Absolutely, yeah.
Brilliant. So I'll jump in with the officer, if that's all right. So the FEC officer, you can take it at all 4 tiers at the usual costs, usual 2 extra men.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can make them Goumier, which gives them Tough Fighter and Mountain Warrior for 2 points. Although you do pay 5 points for your companions. So it's a 12-point upgrade, basically. But your companions do get Fanatics as well, which is why they're paying the next 3 points. You can alternatively just give them the Mountain Warrior rule for 1 point a man.
Yeah.
I think that is worth doing because the amount of times you're going to use your officer to rush an objective at the end of the game. You could also make them Foreign Legion, which gives them the Legion Special Rule. What does the Legion Special Rule do, Phil?
So the Legion Special Rule, this is for obviously French Foreign Legions. Units, they can re-roll morale checks to stay on the table.
So a little bit Soviet there.
It's worth noting, actually, that is, if you take the Free French from the Western Desert book, that rule applies to the entire army. So there's a nice bit of continuity there from the Free French in Western Desert to the Free French, or so not the Free French, to the French Expeditionary Corps in Tough Gut.
Nice. That's actually a really nice little rule to add on. I don't know how much use you're going to get out of it with your officer. I suppose it's great for prep bombardment if you just have 2 men and you take a morale check before the game even starts. And then finally, you can make him an officer of the 1st Motorised Division, Italy 44, for an additional 1 point per man. What does that one give you, Phil?
So the officer of the 1st Motorised Division, do you know what? I think it gives you Esprit de Corps.
Esprit de Corps.
Because that's what you get.
I have to say, just as a note, generally they're really good at referencing what page the special rules are on, but they haven't here, unfortunately.
Well, I think there's a 1st Motorised Division infantry squad, and that allows you to have Esprit de Corps. And Esprit de Corps is where you remove D2 pins.
So is that what we think it is?
Yeah.
It looks like that gives you Esprit de Corps, which we've already covered, haven't we? That's D2 pins when you pass an order test.
That's right.
Brilliant. Any thoughts on him before we move on to the next squad?
Yeah, so I think what they're doing there is allowing you to take a French officer, an FEC officer, and to customize it depending on what the majority of your platoon is. So is it Goumiers? Is it Moroccans or Algerians? Is it Foreign Legion, or is it the First Motorized Division?
Yeah, and it's nice. I think what I would be doing with this fella is I'd be giving him Legion and Mountain Warrior if I was just playing as competitively as possible. He can't be inexperienced. I don't think I said that at the beginning. And so I think I would be trying to make a little squad that can run around and is a bit hardy to take objectives.
I wonder if you can take. Sorry, just to jump in. It doesn't say that you can't, but you were just saying that you'd give him Legion and you'd also give him the Mountain Warrior. So you'd be making him a Moroccan
French Foreign Legion officer.
Yeah. And it doesn't specifically say you can't mix and match. It just says you can pay these points and you can add this special rule.
Yeah. Some of them probably are sort of mutually exclusive. But my understanding is the Foreign Legion is made up of a mix of nationalities and sort of people of different backgrounds. And so if you added Foreign Legion on top of one of the other ones, like the Moroccans, I don't think that's as much of a clash as, the Maori Paragurkas that came out a few years ago. Yeah, I think, having an Algerian Foreign Legion, that's okay by me. So moving on, the US finally got an LMG section, didn't they?
Just what they needed.
Just what we've all been waiting for, yeah.
With their national characteristic of fire and maneuver.
Yeah, so you start with 6 men. You have to have the LMG, so you start at 80 points. You can take a second LMG.
Yeah.
The only thing to note with this squad, which is interesting, is that you can have 4 pistols in addition to other weapons, and any of the men can have those pistols. So it's quite nice in that regard that you can have 4 pistols, but generally, I don't think we're going to see a lot of US LMG sections when you're paying 40 points for 2 LMGs.
Yeah, no, fair point.
And then the next one I think you were really excited about, weren't you, Phil?
Yeah, and I do think you will see these in certain events. If you're dual platooning it, I think you're going to see these. So this is the reconnaissance squad. It's a 3-man squad. It's 27 points in experience, 36 regular, 45 vet. You can add up to 6 additional men at 9, 12, or 15. So it's 2 points on top of the base cost. You can add up to 2 SMGs. You can add a bar, and you can also make them or give them anti-tank grenades. Now, there are 2 special rules. They are recon troops, so they spot hidden enemy units at 18 inches rather than the normal 12. But the thing that I like is you can forward deploy them. So they can be set up in the same way as snipers and observers. So you could create potentially a 9-man forward deploying vet unit with 2 SMGs, stick a bar in if you want. I think I'm right in saying it's the first time the Americans or the US have got forward deploying units that aren't just like small teams.
Yeah, I think previously the biggest they could have was 4 or 5.
Okay.
So you can have nice big squads. The 2 points a model is a bit steep because you're paying the 1 point for forward deployment, 1 point to do the recon troops where you spot stuff at 18 rather than 12.
Yeah.
How often are you going to use that? Sometimes I imagine it'll really pay off when you're playing no man's land.
Yeah.
But generally, I think it is a bit steep, so it's not super competitive as a choice. But it's not uncompetitive, especially if you built your entire force with these so that you've got nothing in your deployment zone at the start.
Yeah. Where I think you'll see squads like this and others that are going to appear in a bit is when you go to events which are capped at a number of dice. So, a 12 dice cap or 14 dice cap at 1,000 points. You go to a 12 dice capped event, you've got way more points to spend on your infantry because your support units and armored vehicles and all that kind of stuff, like they're not going to change in terms of the cost of the unit. A tank costs a tank, whether or not, So it effectively gives you more points to play with regards to the infantry choices you take. If you've got a single generic reinforced platoon, 12 dice, you can only take 5 infantry units. It gives you the points, or it creates a space to spend the points on slightly more expensive squads. And that's where I think you might see squads like this and some of the others that we're about to talk about appearing in events. It's not a super competitive choice. I don't think you're going to see this at the WTC across the board or a nationals event, but you're sort of, slightly toned down 1-day event, limited dice cap, all that sort of stuff. I think that's where they could start to be seen.
I tell you, as we're talking about it, I am thinking about that recon troops rule. And actually, if you are playing no man's land, what's quite nice is because you've got the extra 6 inches there, it pairs very nicely with your BAR, because if you'd forward deployed and you were 15 inches away, so you're within regular range with your BAR, normally the unit would still be hidden, but actually these guys would spot them. And so that is quite a nice pairing to put pins out early in No Man's Land specifically.
Yeah.
And so it actually might have more of a place than I originally thought, that one. But I think that I'm going to have to play with it, I think, to see how good it really is.
Yeah.
The next one, what's the next one we've got going on, Phil?
So this is the 100th Battalion Nisai Infantry Squad. So these were the Japanese Americans. And obviously after Pearl Harbor, there was a lot of distrust towards them. They were pushed into their own unit. So what you get here then is for 102 points, they are 17 points a man. So it's a veteran squad, 6-man minimum. You can add up to additional 6 men. You can add up to 4 SMGs. You can add up to 2 BARs, and you can give them anti-tank grenades. So for your 17 points, you're getting a veteran with tough fighters and 2 special rules. So the first one, going for broke. So Nisai squads are automatically treated as having passed order tests to make an assault. The unit is assumed to have rolled whatever order dice score is needed to pass its order test. Basically like up and atom in terms of British
American up and atom, finally. That's what I've been waiting for.
And then most decorated outfit in this man's army. The Nisai entered the war as one of the most decorated units in the United States Army. When taking both order and morale tests, ignore 1 pin.
Brilliant. So they're going to be hard to stop, the squad, aren't they?
Absolutely. But you are paying 17 points for them.
Yeah, you are. And I think they are overcosted, to be honest, because having up and atom is nice. The ignore 1 pin, it's okay. They're already veterans, and it's not as good as something like stubborn. So I'd say they're not super competitive. I think there's certainly a place for them. I don't think they're uncompetitive to the point that you'll regret bringing them. I think they're just a bit too expensive, to be honest. I think, having said earlier that I thought most things were fairly priced, I think these are actually just 1 point overpriced.
Fair enough.
But the next squad, the US 3rd Division,
they're
15 points. I'm saying only because comparatively it's cheaper. 6 men minimum. You can have 2 SMGs, 1 on the NCO as usual. You can have 2 BARs, which is brilliant, anti-tank grenades. And then the reason you're paying the extra 2 points a man is they have an unusually high number of Medal of Honor winners, and so they may re-roll order tests, which is nice. And then additionally, they can advance 7 and run 14. This squad, I think, are brilliant. And the reason I think they're brilliant is there are so many times late in an objectives game, you have a squad that just needs to run onto an objective to either draw the game for you or win the game for you. And having those extra inch at advance, 2 inches on a run, I think that's going to win people games when they bring this squad. And yes, they don't have much bite because they've only got a couple SMGs, a couple of BARs, but sitting them in hard cover, just plinking with the BARs until the last turn they can rush 7 onto the objective. The other reason I thought they were really good in that role is because the other thing that happens is late game, you've got the pins on just at the moment you need to rush out. And so how many times have you failed an order test when you just need to get a squad onto an objective at the end of the game to draw or win the game? And these guys get to re-roll it. So I'm a big fan. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, they are good. And they're not, yes, it's 15 points. But I think if you build them alongside other units, they have a particular purpose to play in that army. So next up, we have the FSSF section, Anzio. So the FSSF is the Joint American-Canadian unit, very similar to British Commandos. They were modelled along the lines, or certainly took inspiration from the British Commandos. This unit is very similar to what appeared in Soft Underbelly, although the points are slightly different. So this unit is costing you 17 points per man for veteran. So 6 men's 102 points. You can add up to 6 additional men. You can add up to 3 SMGs. You can add up to 2 with automatic rifles. And one of these can be a Johnson light machine gun for plus 5 points. One or both can be a BAR.
Yeah.
So the Johnson, it's got a range of 24 inches. It gives you 3 shots, and it benefits from the fire maneuver special rule.
Yeah, don't do it. It's
Okay.
so for 5 points you gain 1 shot and lose the range of the BAR.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather have the BAR. I think 90% of the time.
You can add an LMG for 20 points. You can make or give them anti-tank grenades, and you can give them thermo charges. So in terms of the special rules, they're tough fighters. They get death cards. So enemy units must first pass an order test in order to assault an FSSF section. They take this test as if they have an extra pin marker on them, even if they have no pin markers. Freddy's Freighters, which is the same as the Mountain Warrior special rule we mentioned earlier. Masters of Concealment, which is the one about getting revealed if you're hidden.
Yeah, so they've basically got Tiger Fear, but for close quarters, which is interesting. Yes. So the problem with this is, and obviously I haven't tried this yet, so I don't know exactly, but the problem I see with this is all those armies that have ignore the test to charge are just going to ignore the special rule, aren't they?
Yes.
And so I'm a bit reluctant as a player to pay points for something that has a counter, especially when that counter, it's not like it's a rare one that we only see sometimes.
Yeah.
You see it quite a lot when people bring Brits or Japanese. They both have a counter to this. Now, in campaign play, the players you're playing don't have that counter. So that's in that scenario, brilliant. But in generic play, I would say this unit is one that I'm personally going to avoid because I don't like paying points for rules that get negated.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough.
The US 45th Division is next. Slightly cheaper, this one, than the last one. At only 11 points regular, 6-man minimum, up to 12 men in the squad. You can have 2 SMGs, you can have 2 BARs, and they are stubborn. So actually, you're paying 1 more point per model, but it's because you're stubborn. Fantastic squad. There's not a lot of stubborn US infantry, is there? What have we got? We've got paratroopers and Marines, I believe, are the only 2 I can think of.
Yeah, they're basically late war Marines, aren't they? With 1 fewer BAR, because late war Marines, you're paying 10 points for regular. You can take up to 3 BARs. You only get 2 with this squad, and you can pay 1 point for stubborn.
I tell you the difference, though. The late war Marines can have pistols. They can have 3 pistols. So you can kit your BARs out with pistols as well, which is very nice to sort of deter charges.
Yeah, to give you tough fighter. Yeah.
And so these are good. They're fairly costed. I think they're not an auto-include, but they're a good unit. If you build your army around them, you're not going to regret it, I think.
No.
And then the next squad, is this another French squad, Phil?
Yeah, so you've then got 5 of the French colonial units that were fighting under the US sort of jurisdiction. So the Gouma regulars, so these are the Moroccans, they're from the Atlas Mountains in North Africa and Morocco. They're very expensive, but you'll see why in a moment. So they're costing you 15 points for a regular or 18 points for vet. 6-man unit is your base unit. You can add 1 SMG on the NCO. You can add a BAR, or you can add an LMG, not both, and you can give them anti-tank grenades. Special rules, they're fanatic, they're tough fighter, they're mountain warriors, and they're tank hunters if you give them anti-tank grenades. So, yes, they're expensive, but to my knowledge, this is the only US fanatic tough fighter unit, plus the mountain warrior special rule where they can run through rough ground.
Yeah, I can't think of any fanatics in the US Army other than these. They're expensive, but they're not overcosted because normally fanatics 3 points. Yeah. Tough fighter, mountain warrior, that's 5 points of upgrades. I mean, it's not my cup of tea because they're too expensive, a bit rich for my blood. But I can see many players who would definitely include them so they can have some fanatics in their US Army.
Yeah, and I think, going back to the earlier point about those limited dice events, if you've capped at 12 order dice, you've got more points to spend on your infantry. You might start having a look at these, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Next one is your Northwest African Tirailleur squad. So these are typically Algerians, but it can include Moroccans and general colonial troops from North Africa. They are 10 points regular or 13 points vet. 6-man is your base unit. You can have 1 SMG, you can have a BAR or an LMG. You can give them the Mountain Warrior special rule for 1 point per man and give them anti-tank grenades.
Yeah, not much to note on them. Fairly standard squad from my perspective.
Yeah, they are the ones that, historically speaking, the majority of the FEC units were Northwest African Tirailleur squads. So thematically, you'd expect to see most of these units. Next one's your first motorized division infantry squad. They are 10 points regular, 30 points vet, 6-man is your base unit. You can have one SMG. You can either have a BAR or an LMG. You can make them tough fighters for 1 point per man. You can give them anti-tank grenades for 2 points per man, and you can give them the Esprit de Corps for 1 point per man.
Yeah, this squad, again, fairly standard squad. I don't find it that exciting. There's probably more exciting ways to get tough fighter. And Esprit de Corps is fine, but again, I don't find it hugely exciting.
So you can make them regular tough fighters. I don't think you can do that elsewhere in the US. You can your veteran squads you can make. Yeah, your veteran rifle squads you can make tough fighters, can't you? But I don't think you can do it with regulars elsewhere.
I think you're probably right. If one springs to mind, I'll jump in at an inappropriate moment with it. Generally, I think if you're going for tough fighters, though, you want those veterans, don't you?
Yeah.
And so I think the others,
Yeah, okay.
not bad. I just don't find them that exciting, unfortunately. I think I don't see a unique use case for them, I think, is the reason why.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Fair enough. Next one is your French Foreign Legion squad. These are, interestingly, you can take these as regulars because the Western Desert Foreign Legion you can only take as vets. So these are 11 points regular or 14 points vet. 6-man is your base squad. You can add up to 3 SMGs. You can add either a BAR or an LMG, and you can give them anti-tank grenades. So the extra point per man you're paying is for the Legion special rule, and that, as we said earlier, allows you to reroll morale checks. And then the last unit you get under the US is the Spahi squad, and they were native Moroccan and Algerian cavalry units. When the Americans reorganized and equipped them, they became reconnaissance units. And they were equipped with Stuart light tanks, armoured cars, and half-tracks. These are 12 points regular or 15 points vet. 6-man is your base unit. You can add 1 SMG. You can add either a BAR or an LMG. You may add the second LMG, and you can give them anti-tank grenades. And the special rules you get, recon troops, which is to do with spotting hidden enemy, tank hunters if you pay for it. And the other one that I do like is they forward deploy.
Yeah, they have the exact same special rules as the reconnaissance squad we talked about earlier. And they're basically the same squad, except you can have 3 additional men and LMGs, which you couldn't have with the reconnaissance squad. So actually, you've got 2 squads that very much overlap because most players aren't going to take the LMGs. So you could just swap the entries out depending on which models you prefer.
Yeah, exactly. If you were wanting to represent a French army or US supported French army, you can now do that using these units we've just gone through.
Yeah, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Brilliant. They do have a couple of heroes. I didn't find them as exciting as a bear.
Which is reasonable, I would say.
The first one is a staff sergeant. He's got lots of nice rules for shooting. He's 130 points though, so we probably won't see him that often. It's Staff Sergeant Odie Murphy.
Yeah.
And then the second one is PFC William James Johnston Sr. And he's an MMG team made up of just PFC William Johnston.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he gets +1 to hit modifier when shooting.
Yeah.
He can advance and shoot his MMG, but he gets a -1 to hit penalty. But that's okay because he had a +1 modifier. So that balances out. He cannot be pinned. So it says no pin markers can be placed on him ever. The exception to this is if Johnston's MMG team has 10 pin markers, it still routes as normal, but you can't put a pin on him. So how can he have 10 pins on him if you can't put a pin on him?
That probably needed to be read again before it got printed.
Yeah, I think what they meant was pins don't affect him ever, apart from he'll run away.
When he routes. Yeah. You can pin him, but they don't affect his shooting.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why we don't see these special characters at tournaments and events very often, because they quite often have these quirky rules where they probably could have done with a bit of a proofread beforehand.
Yeah.
And also, he has 2 wounds, much like the bear. So he is as tough as a bear. Good note. So we've just looked through the US entries, including the French ones that fought under US command. Next, we've got Allied Italians. What's going on there, Phil? I thought the Italians were the Axis.
Well, they were, and then they weren't.
As usual.
As usual. So after the fascist regime collapsed in July 1943, the Italians that remained, because a lot of Italian soldiers put their arms down and went back to their villages and that sort of thing. But the ones that did remain did fight under the Allied command.
So are a lot of these soldiers who therefore fought on both sides of the war. So they were fighting on the Axis side of the war, and then at this point, they've completely changed allegiances to the Allies.
Yeah, you do see this in other nations. So the French, the Vichy French, for example, in North Africa,
Mm-hmm.
when they surrendered in North Africa, loads of them went over and fought for the Free French.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you had Indians fighting for the Japanese, who originally were fighting, obviously, as part of the Indian army against the Japanese under British command in Burma. So it's not just something that the Italians did. There is a precedent in other nations during the course of the war.
Yeah. It sounds like if a lot of them went home
Mm.
and stopped fighting completely, it sounds like the ones who remained would have good morale, basically. Is that seen in the rules?
You do see probably more veteran units, I think, than you may see in other Italian units.
Mm-hmm. And they do all have a similar rule to what we've seen already with Esprit de Corps, don't they?
Yeah, so quite a few of them have Forza di Animo. Yeah, not all of them, but quite a few of them do, yeah.
Brilliant. Should we jump in with the headquarters then?
Yep, so HQ unit, it's the 1st Motorised Group / CIL officer. Its basic points cost, so second lieutenant 35, 50, 65, inexperienced regular vets. You can take up to 2 extra men. They are armed as modelled. You can make them a paracadutisti?
I don't know.
One of them. You can make them a parachute officer. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
For plus 2 points per men. That gives you the Forza di Animo rule, and also stubborn, which is interesting because previously, when we were looking at the French one, you couldn't combine the Esprit de Corps and stubborn.
That's nice.
So these can be both stubborn and the D2 pins. You can make them an Alpini officer, giving them the Mountain Warrior special rule. And you can make them the Bersaglieri officer. And that gives them the Avanti Avanti special rule.
An Avanti Avanti lets you re-roll failed order tests to advance or run.
Yeah.
And much like the previous French officer,
mm-hmm.
Can I make a parachuting Alpini?
Bersaglieri officer.
Well, I wasn't going to go for all 3, but if you're offering.
It doesn't say you can't, but I don't think you can, because the point is that this is an officer leading a particular platoon or company or what have you. So I think it's either going to be a Paracadusti or an Alpini or Bersaglieri. But I do appreciate it doesn't actually say that in the text.
Yeah, and this one does feel a little bit different because it's not like with the Foreign Legion where you'd get men of different backgrounds joining up. These are very different units, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think rules as written, you probably could combine all 3, but for thematic play, don't.
Yeah. So in terms of the Italian units, you get essentially it's one of those 4 different regiments we've mentioned. So you get the Paracadusti section,
mm-hmm.
which is 15 points for vets, 5 men base unit. Up to 5 can have SMGs. You can have 1 LMG. You can give them anti-tank grenades. You could mount them on motorbikes if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
You could convert them into a first squadron de Ricognizione.
Yeah, recon troops basically gives you that same rule where you spot things at 18 inches instead of 12.
Yeah, it's an airborne recon unit. That's a much easier way of saying it.
Yeah.
So they get stubborn because they're powerers. They get the Forzio di Animo, bikes recon, and tank hunters pay extra for it.
Yeah, nice little squad, that one. One thing that I did notice looking through the Italian units is all of the squads that have the Forza rule are paying an extra point per model, which I think we probably could have let that slide because it's not that great a rule, and the Italians are already quite a weak force, and so I think you could have just given them that as a free upgrade for those specific squads where it's thematically applicable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next one is the 1st Motorised Group / CIL infantry section. These are 35 points in experience or 50 points regular for 5 men. You can have an SMG, you can have an LMG, you can give them anti-tank grenades. And if you want to, for -2 points per man, you can give them the desertion special rule.
I'd strongly recommend not doing that because what it means is if you take 3 or more casualties that turn, you roll a d6 and on a 1 or a 2, the squad just deserts the battlefield and you remove the squad from the table, counting as destroyed. What that means is most of the time when you lose 3 men, you're probably going to be taking a morale check as well. So you've got a 1 in 3 chance of removing them through desertion. And then you've got your normal morale check. There's a strong chance if you add deserters to your army, you're probably going to lose them the first time they get shot at. So it's not cheap enough to make it worthwhile, in my opinion.
No, moving on. The Alpini section. 55 points regular, 70 points veteran, 5 men, so they're 11 points per man or 14 for vets. You can add an SMG, you can add an LMG, anti-tank grenades, and they get the Mountain Warriors special rule. That's what you're paying the extra point for.
Competent squad, not outstanding. Doesn't have much bite, I would say. But again, it's good because just for run on objectives late game with the extra movement, mainly.
So the final squad is the Bersaglieri section, which is 11 points per man regular, 14 points vet. 5 man as your base unit. Add an SMG, 2 LMGs. You can give them anti-tank grenades. You can give them motorbikes. And the extra point you're paying is for Avanti, which you get to re-roll failed order tests to advance or run.
Brilliant. And I believe this is the squad that, when I ordered my book, as I said, for the bear, I got a free sprue with it, which is very nice of Warlord. And I believe it's these guys that I've got a sprue of. Was it Bersaglieri?
Bersaglieri. Have they got the feathers in the hats?
Of course they've got the feathers in their hats. They're Italian after all.
There we go. Is this the start of your next army, Johnny?
I would go with no. I'd love, to be honest, the Italians, especially the really flamboyant models with all the feathers in their hair on the motorcycles.
Yeah.
Models perspective, I would love an Italian army, but the fact that the rules are just consistently bad. It's one of those things where I wouldn't mind if the rules just weren't good, but to play with negative rules, I can't be doing with it. It would frustrate me too much, I think. So, unfortunately, until the Italians get new national characteristics that aren't hurting them, I'm probably not going to start them. Can I highlight the hero?
Yeah.
Heroes of the Kingdom of the South. So, General Utili, he's a major, 185 points. He's veteran. The reason I want to highlight him is his special rule means that your desertion special rule only happens on a 1 instead of a 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And so if you are building a very thematic army with lots of deserters, it's not competitive, but throw him in, and then at least you'll get a decent game where your troops don't all disappear turn 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on the Italian entries here?
Yeah, so what you can now do, because these combine with the Armies of Italy and Axis book unit, so you can create an Italian allied army using these units, plus the base ones that you get from the Armies of Italy and Axis book.
Yeah, I found that really quite an interesting thing where I imagine there's some units that are very sort of heavily Axis and run them along the very heavily allied themed units might be sort of a bit of thematic friction there, even if it's competitive. So I thought that was quite interesting anyway.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how your generic platoon. If it's, I'm using that generic platoon format to create something that's vaguely historical and thematic, then yeah, that could be a problem. If you're going to an event and you just want to put the best units on the table, if some of these allied units are the best ones you can take, then you're not going to be too bothered, are you, if they are alongside traditionally Axis Italian units.
Indeed. So, moving on to the German units. I was quite excited by the German units, reading through them.
Yeah, if you're a Fallschirmjäger player, there's a lot of good stuff here.
I have to say, the first entry in the German book, if you're following along at home, page 98, the Fallschirmjäger officer, I wish they'd split this into 2 entries because there's a lot going on in this one entry because you can be a 1st or 4th. They're all veteran. They're quite expensive. I'm not going to go through all the points, but just as an example, the 2nd lieutenant is 78 points for the 1st Fallschirmjäger, 76 for the 4th. You can have 2 buddies. Your buddies, again, are different prices depending on who they are. They're 16 if you're in the 1st, 14 if you're in the 4th. Now, the reason for that is the 1st have fanatics and the 4th have stubborn. Now, the other special rule they have is basically they have a morale boost. So they give an additional +1 bonus to other Fallschirmjäger units making order tests. Now, it doesn't say for morale tests. It only says for order tests here. I don't know if that's an oversight or if that is intentional that they don't boost the morale for morale tests. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I guess the special rule is called NCO apprenticeship, and I guess what that is getting at is that the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers, were learning the art of leadership from their officers, and there was a close bond between them. So you can kind of see how it would apply to order tests, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are, of a higher morale. I am thinking on my feet here, but that might be where the rule's going and the wording of the name of the rule as well.
Yeah, there's a few times in here, I think we highlighted one earlier, where the wording, I think, could be a little bit more clear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if they'd added at the end here whether it does or doesn't for morale, because if you don't say that it doesn't affect morale, players will often just assume that it does, especially when you just quickly skim through the rule. And so I think if the intention was for it not to count morale tests, I think it would be really nice just to say at the end, remember, morale tests are not order tests. Like it does I think it does in the rulebook quite a few times.
It does, yeah.
So that's your officer. I think if you're going very thematic, include him. If not, no. I don't think he's a great investment for generic play.
Mm-hmm.
He's just so expensive. And Fanatics, I've played Hungarians quite a lot. Their officers get Fanatic for free. It's a pointless rule because you lose your assistant and you're not Fanatic anymore. And so making them pay points for that, it's not a great rule, to be honest. But if you're going thematic, that extra +1 command bonus, brilliant.
Yeah.
The next squad's an Italian Waffen SS squad. So these are Italians that are they conscripted into, or are they volunteers? Do you know, Phil?
So some were fascist volunteers, others were blackmailed into joining. So POW, Labour camp inmates, etc.
What's interesting is, the reason I was asking that is because they do get the Fanatic special rule. So they're 13 points a men, 5 to 10 men as usual, up to 4 SMGs, up to 2 assault rifles, up to 2 LMGs. The LMGs can have pistol sidearms, which is quite a nice addition, I think. And then you can have anti-tank grenades. Mm-hmm. And then the final piece of equipment is really interesting. I'm quite excited about this one.
Yeah.
The Panzerfaust 30s. So rather than being 5 points, the Panzerfaust 30, it's an early Panzerfaust, so it's only 3 points.
Yeah.
It has the same penetration value, but it's limited to a 6-inch range. I really like that because for 30 points, rather than getting 6 Panzerfaust, you can have 10 Panzerfaust 30s. And now, when I've used normal Panzerfaust, what I find is beyond 6 inches, they're usually pretty ineffective anyway because you'll have moved and long range. And so in the role that I use Panzerfaust, where I'm mainly using them as a deterrent, having a cheaper version has really caught my eye. And I think next time I run Germans, I'll definitely be looking for units that can have the Panzerfaust 30.
Mm-hmm. It's worth noting as well, these are regular. You can't take them as vets. You obviously can get regular SS German squads that you can make Fanatic, but these are only available as regular. So there's another little cheap source of Fanatic units in the German list.
The next squad is, and I don't think we've ever seen one of these before, a Heer Grenadier squad. Usual sort of idea. Usual points, 5 to 10 men, a few SMGs available, 2 LMGs available. You can downgrade one of the LMGs to a Breda LMG, which saves you 5 points, and you lose the buzzsaw rule.
Yep.
So you're getting the same shots as a normal LMG, but for 5 points less. I think if you're going to take LMGs, definitely take that one over the normal LMG because you're losing 20% of your shots for a 25% saving in points. Bargain.
Yeah, you can make them green as well.
Interesting.
So do you get German Grenadier squads that are green elsewhere with the loadout that this lot has?
I don't, to be honest, I don't play a lot of inexperienced squads, so I don't recall one that's got quite as many options for sure, but that's not to say that it doesn't exist. Certainly the thing that's new with this one is like the last squad, they can have pistols for their LMGs, anti-tank grenades as usual. They can have the new Panzerfaust 30s, which I like, and you can give them bicycles. But yeah, I think if I was looking for a green squad, this would be the one I'd take because it's no extra cost to make them green. So you're paying 35 points for 5 green men, and you can give them the Panzerfaust or the SMGs or however you want to kit them out. You've got loads of options there. Yeah, so I can see a place for these, definitely. I mean, if your full army was green grenadiers with 2 Panzerfaust 30s, you're probably going to create quite a roadblock for people.
Just got to hope you don't roll a 1 or a 2 on all of your green tests.
Oh, is it a 2 as well? I thought it was just if you rolled a 1.
Was it just a 1? Is it?
I think it's just a 1, but still, I agree.
Yeah.
Wholeheartedly.
It's going to ruin your day.
Yeah. Now, the next one, I'm excited to see what your opinion is on because I'll tell you my opinion. I think this is quite good. And this is why I think it's quite good. So it's a Pioneer squad. It's the Berlin Spandau Lear Pioneer Assault Squad. They're very similar to normal Pioneers. Veteran 65 points, an extra 5 men, 13 points each. You can have 3 SMGs. You can have a flamethrower. Love it. 1 LMG. The LMG can have a pistol, anti-tank grenades, demo charges. You can have 3 Panzerfaust 30s. So far, it's a fairly standard loadout. A few extra options compared to usual Pioneers, but generally nothing that's hugely noteworthy. But then finally, you can give them the raw special rule. And what that does is they take morale tests as though regular with a base morale of 9, but they're still veterans in terms of wounding. And you save 1 point per man by doing it.
Yeah, and they're veteran in terms of order tests as well.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's only a hindrance when they have to take a morale test.
This is phenomenal.
Yes.
I thought it was just good because I was thinking there's times when I'm on my truck because I'm saving 5 points a squad if I take it at 5 men.
Yeah.
But there's going to be times I'm on a truck and I'm testing it regular,
Yeah.
and it's going to frustrate me to get out. But actually, you've made a really good point there that their order tests are veteran.
We've just turned it up to 11.
Oh, they're brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other reason I thought these were brilliant from a synergy perspective is obviously the risk is if you're regular and you lose your NCO, you're down to an 8.
Yeah.
Because the Germans have that NCO replacement rule on a 2+.
Yeah.
I thought this paired really nicely with that special rule.
Mm-hmm.
Because they'll basically always have that morale of 9. Oh, well, I think next time I build a pioneer army, I'll be taking this squad all day long.
I think that's a really nice mechanic, though. So you're lowering their morale test. You're not lowering the number required to kill them, to wound them, nor are you lowering their order test. And generally speaking, with your pioneers, you're going to be jumping them out and flaming something. Assuming they've done the job, they could be taking pins and shrugging them off because they're veteran. It's only when they're going to be, heavily wiped out or or flamed or whatever, where you've got that morale. So it's not a rare occasion, but what I'm trying to say in a really roundabout way is I quite like the fact you can lower their base morale but not affect their order check or their to wound number. Yeah,
I think it's brilliant to save a point of man for that. As you say, just don't bring them to a flamethrower fight, because if you miss, you one less on the morale check. But I'm definitely going to include them, I think, in the future.
Yeah.
Then we've got 2 types of Jagers.
Yes.
You've got the Gebirgsjagers from early to mid 44, and just the general Jagers.
Yeah.
I'll do them together. So they're both 11 points a man regular or 14 points veteran. In the Jager squad, you can have 6 SMGs, whereas in the Gebirgsjager, you can only have 3. LMGs, 1 each, and you can have a pistol for 1 point. You can have anti-tank grenades in both, and both squads can have 4 Panzerfaust. So the main difference between them so far is the Jagers can have twice as many SMGs, but additionally, the Jager squad have light infantry, which lets them run 9 inches through rough ground, whereas the Gebirgsjager have the Mountaineer rule, basically, where it lets them climb impassable hills as well. And they also have excellent conditioning where when they're climbing their impassable hill, normally if it's over 6 inches, it takes you 2 turns. These guys are in such good condition, they can do it in a single turn. To be honest, I don't think there's going to be that many times you come to a table and there's a hill taller than 6 inches.
Yeah.
And so, yes, that's better and it's free.
Yeah.
But you're going to get use of it so rarely that I personally would take the Jagers, take 6 SMGs, or if I've got 5 men, I'd take 5.
Yeah.
Take 4 Panzerfaust 30s, and then I would put them behind a wood and then run 9 inches through the wood to use the Panzerfaust. And then also sort of grabbing objectives late game. That squad, I think, is a very good squad. And again, if you don't want to run the Pioneers, I think the Jagers are a great place to look for your skirmish infantry. Any thoughts on them, Phil?
I really want the Gebirgsjagers to be good because I love the models. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, they aren't bad. It's just that you get less SMGs. That's the only difference.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone would ever rivet count you to the point that if you ran them as just Jager, they'd call you out on it. You'd have to be a real rivet counter to say that actually those are Gebirgsjagers, not Jagers.
Yeah, the models are great, and War Games Atlantic have just released the digital versions or digital range, haven't they, of them as well? Yeah, there's more and more out there at the moment.
Oh, are they doing 3D print models? Are they?
Yeah, they've released. It's been a while now. You can buy the SDLs from them. So they don't print them for you, but you can buy the SDLs.
Oh, that's really good. To be honest, I've done a lot of tanks, but I've never done infantry. I like to buy my infantry because I don't like having everyone with the same pose, which is the same reason I don't like metals. But that is quite interesting because actually, if you've got lots of STLs from lots of different sources, you can probably put together enough that you get a nice bit of variety.
It's effectively the same as one of their sprues. So you get 4 or 5 bodies and then multiple, arms and weapons and heads and that sort of thing. So it's no different to getting a 5-6 man sprue from War Games Atlantic normally and just putting the arms and the heads on in random combinations. You've just got to print them. That's the only thing.
Yeah, I don't know how I've missed that, but thank you for highlighting it because that sounds right up my street.
You're welcome.
I'll have to get if you hear noise in the background later, it'll be the 3D printer.
Printer goes brrrr.
So, getting back on track with the German units, you'll never guess what's next. It's Panzer Grenadiers.
Oh, we've not seen them before, have we?
Never before. These guys get a free rule, which I thought the motorised infantry I think it was the Italians got motorised and the French. These Panzer Grenadier can re-roll failed order tests to get in and out of transports, which
Yeah, but don't you get these? These came out in Fortress Budapest. Didn't
They did. I think in Fortress Budapest, you might be paying a point a model for that rule.
they? Okay, fair enough. I was just going to say you also get Panzerfaust 30s with these guys, rather than I don't know whether or not you got normal Panzerfaust with that unit.
I believe, I mean, I could be wrong here, but I think this is the first outing for Panzerfaust 30s in bolt action.
But no, soft underbelly wasn't.
Oh, it's the soft underbelly introduced them, sorry.
But basically, it was Italy 1943 on.
But yeah, I'm a big fan of them. I've never really looked at them before, and I've decided I'm a huge fan.
Okay,
Because
there we go.
Because they pair really well with my standard weapon, which is the flamethrower. Same range.
Yeah.
Anyway, jumping back to the Panzer Grenadier, 5 to 10 men, 13 points each, up to 3 SMGs, 2 LMGs. You can have a pistol with the LMGs again. I like that every unit's got this pistol option for the LMGs.
Mm-hmm.
You can take anti-tank grenades that you're not going to take, and you can have 3 Panzerfaust 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So, not hugely noteworthy, but I suppose if you just want some men with Panzerfaust to go in a transport, you might as well get the free motorized infantry rule here.
Yeah.
So moving on to the Spar Troop, which are scout squads, effectively.
They are, yeah.
These guys are really interesting. So they're a bit pricey, 13 points a model.
Yeah.
You start with only 4 men, and you can add up to 2 extra, so 6 men total. Up to half of them, 3 men can have an SMG.
Yeah.
You can give them the Mountain Warrior and Excellent Conditioning rule, which the Gebirgsjäger have, and that makes them Gebirgsjäger Spartruppen for 2 points. You can give them Stubborn, which makes them a 4th Fallschirmjäger Division Scout Troop for 1 point per man.
Yeah.
And you can give them Fanatic, which makes them the 1st Division for 3 points per man. Now, I'm liking this already because I can give them Stubborn and I can have a few SMGs. But the reason you're paying the extra points is you get an escape reaction.
Yes.
So when it's shot at or assaulted, if you haven't acted yet, you can escape at an advance. So, it's a 6-inch run move. And then you put the die next to them that says run. So they're going to be on their feet. They haven't gone down. But it's really nice for getting them out of trouble, especially if you're being charged at 11 inches. Just step back. They also get forward deployment, so they can set up like snipers. And they have that recon troop rule.
Yeah, that'd be really good.
The only thing for me that would make the squad better is if they could have Panzerfaust. Yeah, but I think I probably would go 6 men.
Okay.
Pay 14 points a man to make them stubborn. Is what I would do.
I was going to go all in.
Fanatics
with SMGs. Forward deploying fanatics with SMGs. 22 points a model. Nothing else in my army. There we go.
Jeez. Oh, wait a minute though. Are you also going to give them Mountain Warrior?
No, because then they'd be Fallschirmjäger, Gerbesjäger, Spartruppen. No, that's too much of a mouthful.
I think they're exciting. They're not super competitive because you are paying a point per special rule. And one of the rules is just to spot things further away when they're hidden, which isn't coming up in every mission. So not super competitive, but certainly a lot of fun. And so definitely one to consider.
Yeah.
Then you've got some Fallschirmjäger to go with your officer. These guys are 15 points each, 6 to 12 men. You can have 6 SMGs, 3 assault rifles, 2 LMGs, AT grenades, 4 Panzerfaust, which is good. Again, you've got that option to give them Fanatic instead of the Stubborn, which they come with for 2 points. So they're coming as the 4th.
They are the 4th. They can become the 1st. Yeah.
Yeah, they start as the 4th, they can become the 1st.
But I don't understand why they're 15 points each rather than 14.
I know exactly why, sir. Because in their weapons, they have pistols as well.
Ooh, nice. Okay, I didn't see that.
Which is interesting because they're all tough fighters, stubborn tough fighters, but also you've got that pistol for when you're doing...
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because there's times you don't want to charge. Like, if you're coming up against Gurkhas, you might always want to jump out and shoot them with the pistols for one turn.
I've just got visions of my first Fallschirmjäger division with my Fanatic Spar Troop Fallschirmjäger SMG toting forward deployers, tough fighter stubborn Fallschirmjäger squads, and then the next unit, we're sticking some Fallschirm Pioneers.
Yeah. To be honest, if I was doing the Fallschirmjäger, I'm going to go with the 4th division, I think, and because I'd prefer stubborn over Fanatic because it's cheaper.
I think I've just enjoyed playing the Japanese recently. That's why I'm like, oh, Fanatic.
Yeah. The difference there is you got it for free, though, didn't you?
That is true, yeah.
So the Pioneers, stubborn again. You can do a few things with this squad, to be honest. So let's go through this with a little bit more care because this is one that I've seen in the sort of the previews, people commenting online. there's been a few people have made a mistake with this one. So effectively, it's 6 men for 14 points a model, 84 points. You can take an extra 6 men. You can have 6 SMGs. You can have 3 assault rifles. Any man may have a pistol, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
You can have an LMG. You can have a flamethrower. You can have 80 grenades, 4 Panzerfaust, demo charges, Bangalores. You can make them the first Falchion Pioneer squad by giving them Fanatics, which is a 2 points upgrade because you've already got Stubborn, because it replaces the Stubborn. You can't do that if the Heroes of Eben Emal is taken. So for 1 point a model, you can give them the Heroes of Eben Emal, which gives them the following special rule. So the 12th Falchion Pioneer squad gets +1 to hit when firing flamethrowers. So what that means is normally when your flamethrower advances out of your truck, quite often you're hitting on a 3 because it's point blank.
Mm-hmm.
If you're within 3 inches, you're point blank but moved. So those two things cancel each other out. You're hitting on a 3. If it's beyond 3 inches, it's point blank, long range at the same time cancelling out, but you moved as well, so it's a 4+. So with this special rule for 1 point a model, your flamethrowers, instead of hitting on 3 and 4, it's going to be hitting on 2 and 3.
Yep.
So it's not always hitting on 2s.
No.
It is a bit of a perk. To be honest, I don't think it's great because you're paying 15 points a model. And if you're doing that just as a vehicle to deliver a flamethrower, it's a mad amount of points. You're looking at 110 points compared to 85 for just a regular, a normal veteran squad, 5-man veteran squad with a flamethrower. So I think it's good, but it's certainly not an auto-include.
Yeah, so because you have to take them as 6 men minimum, and you have to pay 1 point per man, it's a 6-point upgrade to get a +1 to hit whenever you fire your single flamethrower in this unit.
Yeah, and you are getting Stubborn, which is great if you are doing, much like earlier we said, don't use this unit for flamethrower versus flamethrower fights.
Yeah.
Because this one's Stubborn, this is the ideal one to flush out other flamethrowers. But crikey, it's a lot of points.
Yeah, there already is a Falchion Pioneer squad available in a generic platoon.
And it has Stubborn?
Yeah, because it's a Falchion Pioneer squad.
Oh, perfect. So
this is not a unique Falchion Pioneer squad that already exists. It's in one of the D-Day books.
Yeah.
But I think it's in the US sector D-Day book.
Yeah, so I think I'm probably going to do that, to be honest, and pay 90 points instead of 110 points to have a 5-man veteran Stubborn squad with a flamethrower with just a normal Falchion Pioneer squad. Yeah, so good. I think, like we've said for many units, if you include it in your thematic army, you're not going to regret it. And there's going to be times that +1 is going to make a massive difference and just win the day for you. But equally, you're not going to have a lot of these +1 flamethrowers in your army because they're so expensive.
No.
Now, the next squad, on that note, I think is an auto-include for me. So it's the Gavir 43 sniper team. The Gavir 43 was a semi-automatic rifle, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so what that means is you're firing faster, and therefore it has the fire and maneuver special rule that the US get, which is brilliant. So your sniper can advance and fire his rifle as though he didn't move. But also, after the sniper has shot, on a 4-up, a veteran sniper gets a second shot, and on a 5-up, a regular gets a second shot. So effectively, if you're a veteran, half the time your sniper's going to take 2 sniper shots. The second shot has to be at the same target, but in my mind, that's fine. It means you do only get 1 pin per turn, but what it does mean is there's so many times that I've fired a sniper at a mortar team, got the hit, and then not got the wound. And so having that second opportunity, I think, is huge. And for 5 points regular, where you've got a 1 in 3 chance of the second shot, I think that's really good. Oh, it's also only a 5 points upgraded veteran as well. It's only 70 points veteran. So for me, much like the Finnish sniper we talked about in last episode, I think now when I'm building a German army, I'm probably going to be throwing one of these in. Are you not that impressed by it?
No, I am. No, the only limitation is you've got to shoot at the same target, but gives you 2 bites at the cherry, I guess. Apple, or mix them up.
There's enough squads that are carrying 2 special models that if you do get lucky and you do get 2 hits, 2 wounds on the same squad, you've got 2 special things to take out. I'll tell you what's really good against veterans. If someone is bringing a flamethrower in a veteran engineer squad, you've only got a 1 in 3 chance of killing it after you've got the hit.
Mm.
And so having that second chance,
Mm-hmm.
I think, is huge for only 5 points. So if I do include a sniper in the future in my German army, it will always be one of these ones. Brilliant. There's 2 tanks in here. Sorry, there's a few tanks. The 2 that I was talking about there, you've got a Tiger 1 and an Elephant. They're very similar to the rulebook ones. They get a points reduction because they're mechanically unreliable.
Mechanically unreliable. So when given an advance order, the player controlling the vehicle rolls a die before moving. On a roll of 1, the vehicle has a temporary mechanical problem and is immobilized this turn, but it can still fire its weapons normally. If you give it a run order, you roll a die before moving. On a 1, it's broken down and is immobilized for the rest of the game. On a 2, it's temporary mechanical problem. It's immobilized for the turn. If a roll ever needs to be taken on another chart that affects the vehicle's movement, such as mud, rubble, snow, etc., so terrain, all rolls.
Thematic rules.
Yeah, thematic rules. All rolls need to be taken separately.
Yeah, it's just clarifying that you do both. And this is what actually I was asking for earlier, wasn't it? Having that explanation sentence at the end where it says you do both rolls just adds a really nice bit of clarity there.
Ah, yes.
So I'm going to skip the next one and just jump ahead to, we do have a Flak Panzer T-34, which is basically a Wirbelwind.
Yeah.
4 autocannons, 1 hull-mounted MMG, open top, 240 points. It's a Wirbelwind. Don't need to talk too much about it. I like them.
Mm-hmm.
You've got another flak unit, which is an 88 on the back of an SDKFZ-9.
This is awesome.
Oh, really? You like this one?
Yeah. It's just got taken an 88 and just shoved it on the back of the SDKFZ-9. It's brilliant. I love it.
All right. I thought you were liking the rules because I love whenever they put an 88 on any vehicle.
Yeah.
I love it, but I really don't like the rules on this one.
And there was only 12 of them. So, yeah, it's right up my street. Oh, there was one of them. We'll have that. There we go.
Yeah. It's hugely expensive, 215 points. It's only armor 7. It's open topped. And if you shoot the left or right arc, it's +3 penetration instead of +1. So I don't think it's the best way to take an 88, if I'm honest.
This is the kind of thing that friend of the podcast, Sam, this is the kind of thing he would take.
100%. I mean, if I was going to do this, I like where they put the 88 on the back of a Panzer IV chassis.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I would run an 88 if I wasn't going to run it with 7 crew.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Sam would love this one.
He would.
Especially because it's a huge waste of points.
Exactly, yeah. The anti-meta Sam.
Yeah. Moving on, we've got the final unit, which was saved till last, because word's gotten out about it. And to be honest, I can understand why people are confused because I've read the rule a number of times and I'm still a little bit confused by it. Because much like I was saying earlier, it's not clearly worded. So the Borgward or Borgvard, BIV, so it's B4, remote controlled demolition vehicle. So it's like a Goliath, but
on steroids.
Big, yeah. It's got a 450 kilogram demo charge as its weapon. It's 50 points regular, 60 points veteran. It's armor 7. The way the weapon works, because it's not launching this thing, it's going to drive up to you and just drop it off, basically. So it can be used once per game. And it says in the rule, it goes off with a huge bang. It can be used to demolish fortifications, buildings, troops concentrations, and vehicles. It has a pen value of 5 and gets 4d6 against structures and fortifications. The explosion has a 4-inch radius. I'm just going to pause there because I don't know why you've told me that based on what it says later. So I'll come back to that in a second. To use the heavy charge, it needs to start its turn with the front adjacent to its target and no friendly units within 4 inches of the target. So here we have the area where the wording is not clear. When it says adjacent, does it mean touching? Does it mean close to? Does it mean in the vicinity of? What do we mean by adjacent there? That's a genuine question, Phil.
I assume you're asking the question because of the 1-inch gap that you have to keep between your unit and an enemy unit.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to keep a 1-inch gap. And so the way I would have read that is I would have read adjacent to mean touching. However, because it says it can be used against troop concentrations,
I would read it as adjacent being next to. However, because of the 1-inch gap, you can't literally be next to an enemy unit in terms of a vehicle or infantry or whatever. So I am very much thinking on my feet here. I would say then that if you're driving it and blowing up a house, obviously you're touching the house because you can go straight up to the house. Yeah,
absolutely.
If your target is an enemy unit I would say you have to be as close as you can, i.e., no more than an inch away. You've got to be on that inch mark because that is as adjacent as you can get within the 1 inch gap rule.
Yeah, I think it's just not clear enough. And I think the reason it's not clear is because they've basically taken this text from the demo charge. Demo charges can only be used against buildings. And so adjacent makes sense there. And so what I would say is, I think when it says troop concentrations, it doesn't say enemy units. And so I actually think they've done what they often do, where they put flavor text in the rule.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually think this can only be used against buildings and fortifications. That would be my reading, because the thing that also adds to the idea that that is flavor text when it says troop concentrations is just before that it says it goes off with a huge bang, which is flavor text. And so I think this can only be used against buildings. Anyway, if you start your turn adjacent to it with no friendlies within 4, and then perform a full reverse or a full pivot, its track that's 90 degrees, and advance, the heavy charge is detonated, and the player in control of the demolition the demolition vehicle tests to see if the target is destroyed. So there, because it's saying test to see if the target is destroyed, again, that makes me think that you can only use it against houses. All units within 4 inches or inside the target, so the target has to be a building then, because you can't be inside another unit, can you? Suffered 3d6 HE hits, the same as being hit by a heavy howitzer inside a building. So all units that are within 4 inches of the house or inside the house take 3d6 HE hits. So why did it tell me that it has a 4-inch radius, the explosion? Oh, so what it's saying is the explosion to see if you've been hit by it is 4 inches.
From the target point, yeah.
From the target building, it's 4-inch radius from that target building to see if the units have been hit. But when they aren't hit with a 4-inch explosion, which was my original reading of the rule.
No.
They suffer 3d6 HE hits.
Yeah.
I don't understand why, though, because we have templates in bolt action now. Why are units outside of the building being hit like they're inside of a building rather than being hit by a template?
Because it's a cut and paste from the demo charge, which can only be placed on a fortification, building, bunker, yeah.
Ah, okay, that makes sense, actually. I was thinking this could be sort of a hint towards V3 and templates going away. But I actually think you're absolutely right. This is because
they've pressed Control-C and Control-V.
Yeah. And so this particular unit
is not the game changer that everyone's making it out to be.
It's not great. It's once per game. It can only be used against a building. All you have to do is avoid the building that's near. And even then, it's unreliable. So on a 1, it does nothing that turn. So before it moves, you roll the dice. On a 1, it doesn't go off. On a 2, it makes a full reverse move backwards. Now, if it's against the building already, I would say the building would probably still explode. But if it's on its way up to it, it's now going to spend another two turns getting to the building. And then on 3-6, it moves normally. So I think you're right. It's not the game changer people are claiming it is, are they? Is it?
Yeah.
But this unit does make me think that it should have been a theatre-only one, because the wording on it is so unclear that if you take this to competitive play, it's a headache for everyone involved. It's going to be misplayed. There's going to be an unfair outcome for someone.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if it's thematic play, you'll work out what you think should happen. You'll do it. And then if it was wrong, it's not the end of the world, because you still had a fun game and it was a good story and it fitted the story and the narrative of the game. And so I just wish they hadn't made this one generic, if I'm honest. But I'm certainly not going to be including one because it's not very good, in my opinion.
Well, to be fair, if your opponent brings one, you just don't go into a building.
Yeah. It's so simple. Or near, within 4 inches. But now, you could say that that's good, but people were already avoiding buildings because of multi-launchers. So if you brought your Nebelwerfer, people aren't going near the buildings anyway. And so you're never going to catch them off guard with this. I suppose you might do if you didn't bring a Nebelwerfer and you're playing someone who had no idea what this unit is. The main takeaway for me from that was, A, I wish they'd just kept that theatre only, and B, I wish they'd spent a little bit more time just maybe play testing the rule and rewording it to make sure that it was very clear and concise. It's basically a Goliath, isn't it? It's just a big Goliath, and I think we're going to see it. Once the initial, what's the word for?
Magpie, shiny, shiny.
Yeah, once the initial craze has died off,
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to see these at all, really, except every now and then someone will bring one for a bit of fun.
Yeah.
Cool. You've then got some German generals and majors. Basically, you've then got some German heroes. Did any catch your eye?
Actually, General Major Ernst Gunther Bard, rapid counterattack, outflanking units with the General Major Bard and their force may start to roll to bring their units on from turn 2 rather than turn 3.
Oh.
Where and how they come on remain unchanged, treating turn 2 as turn 3.
I tell you what, if he wasn't 200 points, he'd be an auto-include, that guy. Especially because he has a Scottish broadsword for 1 point.
I mean, you're going to, aren't you? Think of the modelling opportunity there.
If you're in for 200 points,
yeah,
how could you not pay the 1 point for the broadsword?
Major Rudolph Harm, 400 points for a veteran Stug 3. Gee.
That's very expensive.
Yeah, you get feigned retreat. If Heinz Stug is given an advance order and makes a reverse move without firing, the nearest enemy vehicle that has not been given an order and has Heinz Stug in its front arc must advance directly towards Heinz Stug. After the enemy tank has finished moving, Heinz Stug may fire its weapons. So you can basically taunt the enemy to come towards you by feigning a retreat, and then you get to shoot it.
I've got to say, I really dislike that. Not because I don't think it's a good rule or anything, but I really dislike, like, you're taking away your opponent's autonomy there.
Yeah.
You're taking away their autonomy. Just that would make me feel really angry as an opponent. And yes, you've paid 400 points for your Stug, so it's ridiculous.
I was about to say it's 400 points.
But at the same time, like, we're playing a game where it's supposed to be like tactics and emulating games. To allow you to move my unit, that rubs me the wrong way.
Okay.
He is flamboyant, though, which is cool. He ignores the effect of 2 pin markers, not just 1.
Yeah.
He still has to take his test, though, his order test. And he also confers a +4 morale bonus to friendly tanks. Friendly units within 12 inches of his tank. So we've got Italian Axis units next.
Yes.
Can I mix the Italian Axis and Allies units? I presume yes.
In a generic platoon, yes, you can, yeah. Although people might look at you a little bit funny, like we said earlier.
So first we've got the RSI officer. What does RSI stand for, Phil?
So I'm not going to say it in Italian, but it's the Italian Social Republic.
And basically you've got all the options for officers at the usual prices, except you can't be inexperienced. Can have up to 2 extra men at the usual costs. Now, you can have the Forza de Animo special rule for 1 point a model. You can also, or instead rather, perhaps, make them parachutists for 2 points a model. That gives them the Forza rule and stubborn, which is a nice little combo. I think that's decent. Not particularly noteworthy, I would say them. Not bad.
I'm assuming you can't get stubborn Italian HQ Axis units anywhere else.
No, I would presume not. We'll find out when we do Armies of Italy, I imagine.
We will do, yeah.
The next squad is parachutists. They're 16 points a model because they've got stubborn, Forza, and pistols. They can have 4 SMGs, LMG, and 3 Faust 30. So what's quite nice is the Italian Axis units are getting access to those Panzerfaust as well.
And if you take the LMG, you get hit with Buzzsaw, but it does cost you 25 points, not 20.
Yeah, I mean, LMGs were already expensive. I'd rather not pay an extra 5 points for one with 1 extra shot.
Fair enough.
But on that note, you do get another unit with Hitler's Buzzsaw, which is the MG42 team. That's 76 points, so that's 11 points more than a usual veteran MMG team. But you are getting stubborn, Forza, and Buzzsaw. Not worth it, in my opinion.
It's also not a team weapon.
Now, this is interesting because yes, but no. Because... So one thing you notice is MMG teams usually have fixed and team in their special rules.
Yeah.
But actually that's a special rule of the machine gun. So if you look at the weapons table at the back of the rule book, it actually says next to MMG, team and fixed.
Yeah.
So they haven't included it here in the special rules, even though it is normally included. Like, for example, in Germany V2, Armies of book, it does say team and fixed. And I don't know whether that's either an oversight, if it's just to save space because it's not necessary, or if it's perhaps, like this is the longest shot, perhaps it's a sign of things to come where MMG teams stop being fixed.
Oh, you're speculating there, Johnny.
It is a big speculation and it is a bit of a wish listing thought, but it would be brilliant if MMG teams weren't fixed. It would fix them.
by unfixing them. Yes.
Phil, would you like to tell us what the next squad is?
Yeah, it's a Decima Mass Naval Infantry Section, ANZIO. So 11 points regular, 14 points vet, 5-man base unit with rifles. You can add up to 4 SMGs, up to 2 LMGs. You can give them anti-tank grenades, and you can give them Panzerfaust. And you are paying an extra point for the Forza Dianimo.
The main highlight for me is the Panzerfaust.
Yeah, and you get a few SMGs as well if you want.
Yeah, you've got, in the heroes of the RSI, Captain Salah, he's a captain, 170 points. He's fanatically courageous, let me tell you.
Nice.
Parachutists within his command range are fanatics instead of stubborn. So they take their stubborn and they add some fanaticism to it. He's a captain, so that's a 12-inch range as well. So he also has Forza and stubborn himself. He's a tank killer. All units within his command range and line of sight armed with Panzerfausts, 30s, Shreks, AT grenades, demo charges have +1 to hit while shooting or assaulting enemy vehicles. And what's interesting with Captain Salah is Salah and his men can each have a Panzerfaust 30 for 3 points. Now that is interesting. If he wasn't a captain and he was a regular second lieutenant and he could take 3 Panzerfausts, that would be incredible. But you've paid 170 points to get those Fausts, so it's not that good.
There was quite a few ifs there.
Yes, indeed. So again, bit of fun. There's probably times when it would go off amazingly where he makes 4 squads surrounding him, fanatics, and they all win combats and you win the game and everyone cheers. But most of the time, I imagine you'll just not get a goal because you got so few order dice in the bag. But so that was all of the units in Italy.
Yeah.
Tough Gut. That is all of the new units. Most of them, I would say, are good. Very few, I'd say, are avoid. And there's 1 or 2 that I'd say, for competitive play, worth throwing in.
Yeah.
So generally, I'd say they've done a pretty good job at adding lots of thematic units.
Yes.
Without unbalancing the core game.
Yeah. And like I said earlier with the British and Commonwealth, they've nicely clarified what it is to include units from a particular nation within a British generic reinforced platoon and how that interacts with the national characteristic for that unit and the one that you choose for the overall platoon.
That nicely leads us on to the national characteristics. Now, you've got the ones that came up in soft underbelly, so you can have an Irish platoon or a Scottish platoon. What that means is the Irish one, you can take your usual squads, which are sort of regular infantry sections or veteran infantry sections. So those are the squads found on pages 22 and 24, respectively, of the Armies of Great Britain. They may make every man tough fighter for 1 point a model, and their national characteristic has to be vengeance. The other big perk for them is that their headquarters can be tough fighter as well, which I quite like. The Scots can add a bagpiper for 33 points. See the episode we did on Armies of Britain. And then it tells you what the bagpiper does. See Armies of Britain. Other than that, I think, is there any other changes to a Highland force?
Not to a Highland force, no, but you can make them Scots Guards.
Nice. What does that do?
So you can have a Guards unit, and the Guards unit gives them discipline, which means they may re-roll order tests.
Nice.
And if you wanted to, you could make them Scots Guards.
And what are the Scots Guards just the same effectively, but with a bagpiper?
Yes. So the Guards allows them to re-roll order tests, and then the bagpiper, because they're a Highland platoon, a Scottish platoon, allows them to re-roll failed morale checks.
I quite like that. I think that's decent.
Yeah.
Canadians next.
So the Canadians are good because in the Canadians previously appeared in the British and Canadian D-Day book. And because that was 1944, 1945, the Canadian special rules were they got tough as old boots. You could make them stubborn using dogged. And then the other one they had was hate the SS. So they became fanatic when they played the SS, which was obviously very, very situational, but it represents what was going on after D-Day. If you take a Canadian reinforced platoon from Tough Gut, you replace the hate the SS with Esprit de Corps. And that gives them the rule we were talking about.
It gives them D2 pins when they pass an order test.
Yeah. And that is far more beneficial across the board than the hate the SS fanatic.
Oh, 100%. So the thing that's interesting with the Indian Army in this book, what I really like is what you said earlier, that they've nicely clarified how these national characteristics work, because historically there's been all sorts of confusion with how the theatre national characteristics mixed with generic. They've nicely clarified it. And in the Indian one, Indian Gurkha and all your infantry weapons teams, like your snipers and your mortars, have blood-curdling charge. The rest of your force gets to choose another national characteristic, unless they also have a characteristic bound to them.
Correct.
Not bad. Not bad at all in terms of rules.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a counterpoint to how they've nicely clarified, if I had 3 different national characteristics going through my army, as someone who has forgotten vengeance countless times when that was my only one, there is no chance I'm remembering 2 or 3, especially when different units have different ones.
So if you're fielding your generic British platoon with your commandos, for example, and you're giving them, let's say, vengeance.
Yep.
You've got your Gurkhas, which you've taken from the Tough Gut book with blood curdling charge.
Yep.
You've got a section of Maoris with formidable fighters.
Yep.
And in the background, there's a piper in a kilt.
Yeah, I mean, even if I just ran Indian exclusive, but I put in a tank, I could give that tank a different national characteristic, couldn't I? I could give the tank vengeance.
You give the tank vengeance, yeah.
Which is good. That's the correct thing to do, but it makes the chances of me remembering even lower.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't be sort of mixing all the different nationalities. I could have a very thematic tank and still have that situation. I like that they've clarified it, but it could be streamlined, I would say.
Whilst it is confusing, what it does nicely represent is the fact that in this period of the war in Italy, there were operations where you had units from many, many different nations under the Commonwealth umbrella, all fighting alongside each other under a particular organisation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. On that note, we've also got the New Zealanders and the Maoris. So we covered them. They have steadfast for the New Zealanders and formidable fighters for the Maori troops. Now, we did have one of our listeners asking about the specific one. So here we go. South Africans, who haven't came up until this point, interestingly, unless I've forgotten.
No, there wasn't a South African unit. No, you're right.
Which is interesting, but you can turn your British reinforced platoon into a South African platoon. If you do that, you have to take 2 regular infantry sections as your compulsory choices and use the following special rules instead of a national characteristic. So we can take it. It's a modified version of bloody mindedness. So when regular infantry sections, weapons teams, artillery units takes no casualties from non-HE fire, they roll a dice, and on a 1, 2, 3, they take the pin. On a 4, 5, 6, they ignore it. So on HE, they always take the pin. Anything that isn't HE, on a 4 up, they ignore the pin. Quick reactions. So you can pay 1 point a man for your regular infantry sections, weapons teams, artillery units, and that allows them to always react to being assaulted. And so they can never be surprise charged, which is quite a nice rule there.
Yeah, I like that one, yeah.
Yeah, especially if you could pair that. I think the place where that's going to be really powerful is something like a flamethrower team, where you get yourself into that point blank position to fire your flamethrower, you miss, you're getting the charge next turn, you can flame. If you want to do a Polish army, they've got rules for that.
Yep.
They can have the wild geese rule for 1 point a man. Any other modifications to make them Polish?
They get up anathema as well.
Yeah. You do have to take Polish infantry or commandos as your compulsory choices.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then commandos, they're in soft underbelly.
It's basically what you get in soft underbelly, where they added a bunch of brand new rules to the commandos, in addition to what was in the British and Canadian D-Day book, when the commandos first appeared as their own force.
And that's basically all the different ways you can modify the British to represent all the different parts of the Commonwealth. Very interesting. The book then moves on to extra equipment and attachments. These are not generic. You've got stuff like canister shot, delayed fuse. They're theatre specific. So in your theatre selectors, you'll see the option to add them. So we're not going to talk through them because they're not applicable to every single army of, let's say, US or Brits. So I'm not going to go through them all individually, but they are there, and there's some interesting ones, basically. Theatre selectors wise, you've got a load of theatre selectors, haven't you, Phil?
You have, and what's really interesting if you like playing with theatre selectors is you can pretty much mix and match a lot of different nationalities within the theatre selectors. You can even have mixed British and American forces in the same platoon. So, for example, the ANZIO British 1st Infantry Division Reinforced Platoon allows you, using the Allied Cooperation Rule, to create a multinational force. I quite like the fact that you can, because of what was going on historically at the time, that is reflected in some of these theatre selectors and how you can combine forces from different nations. So with the US and US supported theatre selectors, similarly to the British, you are able to combine troops from both British and US, which is pretty cool. The one I did want to flag up under the US section is the French Expeditionary Corps theatre selector. This allows you to run a fully French-themed US-supported theatre selector. There are some special rules that are really interesting. So the first one is Relentless Pursuit. And what this says is that infantry squads of the FEC may make a run move after both sides have set up, but before the first turn of the game. During this move, they cannot assault enemy units and cannot be targeted by enemies in ambush. We've already mentioned the Esprit de Corps and the Legion Special Rule and Mountain Warriors. Now, if you combine the Relentless Pursuit rule with the fact that you can take forward deploying big squads, and you also get those fanatic tough fighters, there's a very interesting combination here of running forward before turn one, either from a forward deployed position because you've taken your forward deploying unit, or you've just pushed your fanatic tough fighter veteran unit 12 inches forward before you start turn one. So I think there's quite an interesting little combination of units and special rules that you can put together there. It's going to be expensive and it's not going to work if you're trying to max out your order dice. But limited events or limited dice events, I think there's something there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think the limited dice events where a lot of these theatre selectors shine, because at those you don't mind spending the extra points on units because it's not like you can max out your dice count anyway. So definitely a good point there.
You get an Italian allied theatre selector, if you're so inclined. You get a lot of German theatre selectors.
Yep.
And you also get an Axis Italian theatre selector as well. Basically, there's pretty much something for everybody if you like US, British, German, or Italians in these theatre selectors.
Indeed. So the only note from me on that is there's not a lot of theatre selectors for all the Commonwealth. So things like the South Africans, I didn't see a theatre selector for them, I don't believe.
There's not, no, I don't think there's a specific one, but if you look in some of the detail of some of the theatre selectors, it gives you the option to slant them one way or the other. So you could slant them towards New Zealand or South Africa or Indian, for example.
Fantastic. Brilliant. So the book then goes into generic units. You've got your intel officer, your mule team, holster on limber, generic equipment. You've got bangalows, you've got demo charge, you've got wire cutters, engineering specific ones, usually only seen in theatre play, really, I would say. And then finally, the book ends with fortifications, which a lot of the theatre selectors will allow you to spend sort of 100 points on fortifications, which it's not game changing. Most of them are okay, but essentially you're paying for something that's immobile and at the cost of other units. And so it's not one that I would ever really consider. Now, you could buy 80 inches of barbed wire with the 100 points, and that's the only one where I think it would make a huge difference to your game, because you could literally just block off half the table, couldn't you?
Yeah, I guess if you're building a gunline army, would you consider spending a lot of points for barbed wire to make it even more difficult for your opponent to get close to you and therefore get underneath that minimum range of your howitzers and your mortars and so on? It's the only really time I can think about it outside of a theatre selector.
Yeah, I mean, if I was trying to be as competitive as possible, which I don't think you should really be doing with theatre selectors, but let's say I was trying to lose friends, I would take the 80 inches of barbed wire and put it straight across the table, exactly as you say, to stop things charging my gun line. And I think it's a great strategy. I just don't think I think it could it could be used in a way that's not in the spirit of the game, is what I would say.
Yeah.
I'd say you're not going to see it very often. I wouldn't panic about it too much, but it is one for tournament organisers maybe to watch out for. And it might be one that we start to see coming into packs saying no fortifications, just because it has that potential for abuse, I would say.
Yeah.
Other than that, there's just special rules that there's no point in us really going through, because you're going to encounter them as you need them when you're playing through your campaign. And so we won't go through them because they're not going to be applicable to every scenario and every player. So overall, Phil, what's your thoughts on Italy Tough Gut? Is it a must-buy?
I think it depends on why you're buying it. So if you're looking for a campaign book that gives you a load of generic units which are really, really game-changing and we've never seen the likes of before, it's not going to happen. But that's not what the campaign books are there for. They are, aren't they? They're written to represent a period of the war and for you to play out a campaign, and they're going to add new units specific to that period of the war and that nation, some of which, or in this case, all of which are going to be relevant for a generic platoon. It's not a big book of brand new units where you can just find the most amazing thing that Warlord have come up with, which is going to break the game and change your generic platoon constitution altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. I bought the book myself and I don't regret it. I think it's a really good book. As ever, Osprey's done a brilliant job with it in terms of it looks the part. I really like the maps that are in there. I love when a book has maps in it. It's got great artwork. The history was interesting. I think the rules are well written for campaign play. As you say, if you're only a generic player and you're really into competitive and you're not playing thematic theatre games, it might not be the one for you. But I think even if you're just a little bit interested in the Italian theatre, I think it would be a good buy, even just from the history point of view, because I quite enjoyed reading through the first sort of 30 pages of history of the campaign.
I think as an allied player, I really like it from a historical thematic perspective, because you've got units fighting from so many different nations combining together, be that with, the US supported French units within a US force, or by combining a British and a US force, or you've got all these different Commonwealth units together. So from that perspective, I really like it. From a Axis perspective, if you're a Fallschirmjäger player, there's some great units in here. Equally, if you're an Italian, the fact that you can now field allied Italian forces, I think it's really interesting. The production quality is what you come to expect from Osprey. Like you said, there's some great history, great detail, the maps, the diagrams, the pictures, all that sort of stuff. So no, it's good. It's I like it.
Yeah. And as a German player, at first glance, I didn't think there was much in there for me, but actually, as we read through there and as I read it to prepare for the podcast, there's actually a surprising number of units that I think are going to make it into my generic lists.
Well, that was a bit of a long one, wasn't it? Thank you, everyone who has made it this far. We hope you've enjoyed listening to us go through the book, give our thoughts and so on. As ever, please do leave us a comment, leave us a review, like, share, subscribe. We do like hearing from our listeners. Also, if you're interested in buying some of the units that are going to work from the Tough Gut book, if you look in the description, you'll see that there are links to both Whaling Games and Firestorm Games, where not only will you get a fantastic discount if you use that link, it will also support us and help us to keep producing great content like the pod and like the blog.
Brilliant. Thank you for listening. Ta-ta for now.
Bellissimo.